welcome to the second module of our workshop. This module is called Installing and Navigating QuPath. The module intends to cover these questions. How do we install QuPath? And what do we need to consider even prior to installing QuPath? How to navigate the interface, and what are the various features that we'll use to reference ourselves when interacting with the interface? And how can we share our work, and what are the concepts that we need to understand in order to be able to transfer and distribute our analysis. First, before we can install QuPath, we need to consider some questions. The first, about which computer we should be installing QuPath on. Now, QuPath has pretty minimal requirements for running the software, so it can run on most laptops and computers. However, some of the tasks further downstream will require a lot of computational complexity, and so there are some parts of a computer which can be optimized for those algorithms to run on. So in the first case, we may be able to view and interact with images on most computers, but when we perform certain tasks and run certain algorithms, we may want to consider moving our analyses onto a computer with those parts that are optimized for it to run. We also need to know where our images are being stored and where we can access them on the computer we have in hand. These might be stored locally on an external hard drive or through a MAPS network connection. That means we need to make sure that we have access to the images so that QuPath can also read those images. Finally, if we already have QuPath installed, we need to make sure that when we do come back to the software that we have the latest version so that our analyses can work as smoothly as possible and any bugs that have been identified in older versions can be fixed. We also have different capabilities that we might want to be able to use in future versions of the software. So this brings us to the first exercise of this workshop. I will go through the instructions of the exercises. I will then pause to give you a chance to go through them yourself, and afterwards I will demonstrate how I am able to perform this series of tasks. So in this exercise where we're installing QuPath, we'll go to the documentation for QuPath, going to this specific hyperlink that will take us to the latest version. We'll then click onto the latest release, and in there it will take us to a GitHub coding repository, where we'll then install the files relevant to our operating system. Then we'll follow the prompts for installation, and then open the QuPath software, clicking through the various windows which will open on the first run of the software. If not, we'll be able to view the detailed instructions and common problems in the relevant part of the documentation for QuPath. Here I'll pause so you can try this yourself. I will now demonstrate how I am able to perform these tasks on this computer. First, we'll go to the link in the first step. This will open an internet browser, in my case Firefox, where I'll then be taken to the documentation for QuPath. I'll then see that the latest release is QuPath 0.7.0, and I can click on this link to the GitHub repository and release therein. Here I can see that we're working with version 0.7.0, and we can scroll down to the assets which are the different files necessary for the operating system that you're running. In my case, I'm running a Windows operating system, and I'm going to click on the Windows installation wizard and guide us through the process. Once it's downloaded, we can open the file. Here my browser is just warning me whether I trust the authors, which I do, so we'll proceed. And here you'll see that the installation setup wizard has become available. We'll click through next, and we'll just note where our QuPath software is being installed. You'll note that it will be specific to your user and in a location similar to this, where it's app data local. Now, something to note is that once you install it, it will only be available to you as your user account and not to anyone else that may be using the computer. This is by design because people have individual settings and preferences and extensions that they may have installed and configured. Once we've noted the installation path, we'll click through next, and we'll just click through and keep the default settings. Once ready, we'll then click install, and this will take a few moments. Installation is now finished, and we'll click finish. On Windows, I'll be able to search for QuPath, and here we can see that QuPath 0.7.0 has successfully been installed. First time that you open QuPath, you may receive a prompt saying that you need to agree to the terms of the license that QuPath runs on, and you may also be prompted to check or open the extension manager for QuPath. You'll then come to the welcome window, which gives you links to the documentation, to the discussion forum with other users, and also to the source code for the software. You can also change things like the theme, also change how QuPath checks for updates, and we can proceed by clicking Get Started. Well done, you've successfully installed QuPath. If you are having any trouble, you can refer to the link here at the bottom. So now that you have QuPath installed, let's go through the interface. The majority of your screen will be taken up by this black area, which we refer to as the viewer. This is where you'll be able to view your digital images. On the left, by default, it'll be toggled on, and it's called the analysis pane. You can toggle this off by clicking on the measurement ruler icon in the top left. You'll also notice that in the analysis pane, there are tabs for project, image, annotations, hierarchy, and workflow. These will become apparent as we go through certain tasks in QuPath. We have the menu bar along the top, where there are various drop-downs to the tools that we will use within QuPath. And then some of these tools have been given shortcuts in the toolbar and the icons that indicate what those tools are. So when I'll be going through QuPath later on, I'll generally be referring to either the viewer, the analysis pane, or the menu bar and or toolbar. So before we can open an image in QuPath, we need to have an image to open. So we're going to access an image which comes with the QuPath software from a prerequisite software called ImageJ. which comes bundled with QuPath. So in this exercise, we're going to open ImageJ software within QuPath. We're then going to access the samples and select the fluorescent cells sample, which will then open the fluorescent cells image, and we'll save this as a TIFF file on our computer in a location we can refer to later. So I'll pause here so that you can have the chance to perform this exercise yourself. I will now demonstrate how to perform these steps in QuPath, and first we will go to the icon for ImageJ commands. This is the furthest right icon. Sometimes if the window is minimized, like so, we'll see that some of the icons are hidden. So we'll need to click on the two arrows on the far right and go to the same ImageJ commands. Here we can click on Show ImageJ, and a new window will appear for ImageJ. If you click off onto QuPath, it will disappear, but it should stay open and we can click on it as such. We will go to Files and Open Samples, and here we can see there's a list of images that come with the ImageJ software. We'll be working with the fluorescent cells sample image. This will open the image in ImageJ, but we want to open this in QuPath. So what we're going to do is save as TIFF in a location that we can refer to later on. I'm going to save it to the desktop, and that is now saved. We can now close the fluorescent cells window in ImageJ and the ImageJ window. Now that we have an image to open, we can then open the image in QuPath. There are two options for this, one via the menu bar and the other by simply drag and drop. I'll pause here to give you a moment to try this exercise yourself. I will now demonstrate how to perform the steps of this exercise. The first being using the menu bar tool. We'll go to the top left under Files and click on Open. Here we have a window that opens to navigate our computer, and I save the image on my desktop. Select and click Open, and a window will appear saying what image type we would like to set this as. You can see there are a few options, and QuPath has highlighted the one it thinks it should be. Now, clicking the wrong option is not detrimental to opening the image, just that if we pick a type of image that is relevant to our image, then QuPath will be able to present and access information and present it in a way we can refer to later on. I'll click Fluorescence and Apply, and we can see now that in the viewer our image has opened. To demonstrate the second option, I have closed QuPath and opened it up again. I have then gone to my File Explorer on Windows and navigated to my desktop where I can see the fluorescent cells TIFF image. I can select this image and drag onto the QuPath window, where I'll then be prompted once again to what image type this is. Now we'll be working with fluorescence images and image files that should be identified automatically by QuPath. So what we can do is set this window to always auto-estimate type and therefore not prompt this window in the future. We'll click Apply, and this means now when we open an image which is maybe quite obviously a fluorescence image, QuPath should hopefully identify that. Opened an image in QuPath. When we perform analyses, we want to be able to save that progress for us to open later on. To do this, we need to then create a project which will then save our analyses within. To do that, we'll follow the following steps. And here I'll pause so that you can have a moment to perform this yourself. I will now demonstrate how to perform these steps in the QuPath software. I can go to File, Project, and Create Project. Here, a navigation window will appear, and we can go to Desktop, create a new folder, and call this QuPath_workshop. The reason for this naming is that we want to indicate amongst all our other folders that might be in the same location that this is a QuPath project, and then indicate with a key term or key word for these analyses what this project is about. We can then select folder, and now in the analysis pane under the project tab, we see at the top of the image list there is the name of our QuPath project. Now when we open our image, we get a new window which is called Import Images to Project. This is where we can import multiple images at once and set some basic settings for import. For example, we have the Choose Files button, so we can select multiple images. From the settings, we have which image server is used to read the image. Usually default is fine. And then, as before, we can set the image type to fluorescence. We'll leave the rotate and flip image settings as blank, as well as the optional arcs, but we'll leave the auto-generate pyramids toggle on. We'll learn about what this refers to in another module. We'll leave import objects off and show image selector off. Once we've done this, we can select import. We'll see that the image is now imported into our project and shown in the viewer, but also into an object has been made in the image list of the analysis pane. Hovering over it, we can see there is a thumbnail with some simple information about the image. When a QuPath project is created, a number of folders and files will now appear in that folder. The first is the classifiers folder. This has some default settings for names and will be used for other algorithms that we might apply in QuPath. The data folder, this will have a folder for each object or image in our QuPath project, and then a file which then helps as the interface between these folders in the project and the QuPath software. You might also see an additional file which has the suffix backup, which indicates the backup of that project.qpproj file. This is the reason that QuPath requires a new folder for its project to be created, so that no other folders are either overwritten or confused and can corrupt the project at the start. When we're working with QuPath projects, we want to consider a few things. So where are the images located? This is because I mentioned before that a data folder is created, and within that a folder for each of the images imported into our project. But this doesn't duplicate the original image file. What it does is create things like that thumbnail that I demonstrated before, and information relating to the interaction within QuPath. Therefore, if you move those image files, when you next open the project, you may get a window prompt like this, where you have the images within your project highlighted in red, needing a replacement. Now, sometimes QuPath will offer a replacement URI in the right-hand column, but if not, we can search using the button in the bottom right to navigate our files and find the folder which our data now resides in. Once selecting this, we get something like the following, where the replacement location of the images is now presented to us in the window, and we can apply these changes. Now, one of the key objectives of this module is how do we then share our progress and analyses? Well, at the very minimum, we need to be able to share these folders and files that created the QuPath project to begin with. However, we would also want to consider any other files that are and folders that are created within the project, which are less instrumental to or less critical to be able to open it in the first place, but may have other code or algorithms or settings which we may want to refer to within that project. That brings us to the end of this module, where we have addressed the following questions on how to install QuPath, how to navigate in QuPath, and how we can then share our work with others. The key points for this module is that we can refer to the official QuPath documentation for latest releases, but also for common problems on installation. The QuPath interface is broadly separated into the viewer, where we can view our images and interact with our images, the analysis pane, which relates to our QuPath project, and then tools within either the menu bar or the icons along the toolbar. QuPath projects are how we save our analyses, and also these projects are readily shareable with others who wish to access our analysis. In the next module, we'll be going over some digital image basics and understanding what is the data that is stored in an image file.